Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of All Access AM. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining us. Happy Wednesday morning. Appreciate you guys hanging around for us there as had a little technical difficulties getting this pod off the ground this morning. And so we get started just a tad later than normal, but we do have a good show for you guys today. Really excited about this one as we'll go around the ACC a little bit, looking at some spring football storylines that are developing. I'll give you guys my take on where I see them kind of based on some of the reporting or the sights and sounds that we get at this time of year. And then we will go and look down in Coral Gables later on in the show and see how the Miami Hurricanes are doing in the recruiting world with our friend EJ Holland of On3 Sports and Rivals. As Cane Sport is where you can get that information from EJ, good friend of the show. He'll be joining us at around 9:40 a.m. Eastern time. And I always wonder where EJ is because he hits the road as much as anyone to cover these recruits, and he'll deliver the goods on the Hurricanes and where Mario Cristobal and company are looking in that space. But as we get into this show, I do want to remind you guys we are presented by our friends at OPW Solutions. OPWSolutions.com is where you can find all of your information about how you can get them involved in your business today. You can contact them at 214-444-2305 or email them info@opwsolutions.com. You can get commercial landscaping done, pressure washing, snow and ice control, fence, concrete repair, and more. It's that time of the year of spring where all that landscaping is getting a little out of control with maybe weeds coming back. Maybe you need mulching done. You need, obviously, the grass cut and looking good for people to come to your business. But if you're in North Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, make sure you guys visit with our friends at OPW Solutions, see how they can help you today. And as we get going in this ACC look around spring ball and kind of where things stand, I do want to say this. I don't know if we're in for the most open ACC conference championship race like we had last year. Hopefully, we'll get word on the tiebreakers. I would imagine they discuss some of that at the spring meetings that they'll have, and we'll talk about what else they could possibly discuss there in Mealy Island as they'll convene up there for their annual meetings in May with the coaches and the athletic directors and leadership and things like that of universities. But the reason why I say I don't know if it's going to be the most open race, I do think Miami is obviously a team that you've got to circle as look at how much talent they have, look at how much, uh, yes, they lose, but look at the job that Mario Cristobal has done recruiting to Coral Gables and building up that program to where now it's one of those programs in the ACC that appears to be not on autopilot because that's not how Mario Cristobal works, but it is a program that I think has gotten to the point now where they're going to be right there. They're not going to be volatile in the ACC championship race, but we will look around the ACC, and I'll share why I don't think it's going to be as necessarily open as it has been. But I do think when you see the ACC and you see the teams that have lost a good bit that were good last year, you think of your Virginia, you obviously think of Duke with Darian Mensah departing, and you see some of those other teams that were in the race. There's going to be that drastic difference, I think, this year in the ACC where could this season be a little top heavy? Could it be a Miami? Could it be an SMU sitting there at the top? There could be some other teams in there. And of course, this is a season where I think a lot of people are going to pick wild cards like a Clemson. How do you bounce back from the season that they had? Because they don't even have a quarterback right now. And that always is something that makes me kind of hit pause just a little bit. And we'll talk about that why in a moment as we'll touch on a couple of teams that have quarterback battles brewing. But you see some of the changes for those teams that were really, really good last year. And how do you keep that level? Are those programs at the point as programs where they are going to be that good game in, game out, where they haven't necessarily shown that just yet? And I think that's where you've got to look to a team like a Louisville to step up to the plate with what they have in a new coming quarterback in Lincoln Kienholz. You know he's going to be the guy, but can he be that good early on as they open against Ole Miss and then they play SMU a little bit later? So they have some big tests early. Can their ship for the college football playoff be almost sunk already by the end of September? That would be something that would be, we've got to keep an eye on the ACC side of things, because that's a team that they enter with high expectations. So I look around this lineup of teams and I just see so much change in the top of the standings, but I look to the teams that are going to have great quarterback play, and the teams that aren't necessarily being talked about with quarterback battles and, okay, how are you going to fix this offense or this or that? Because when you kind of have that elevated play from that position, you're always going to have a chance. I mean, that's why NC State always has a chance. That's why a Pitt is going to always have a chance. But then you dive into it and you say, okay, if you feel that type of way about that quarterback situation, how do you then view the rest of the team? And is it a team that, because of the roster, because of the program's, truthfully, history, is it going to be volatile? A team like Virginia really bucked that trend in a sense because they had a quarterback. They found their guy, and it paid off because they had the right pieces in place and they made the ACC championship game. Duke has had their guy in the past with Darian Mensah having that great 1 year there in Durham, but he's now gone. A lot of questions around that. And even then, we saw Duke be a team that, as a roster, wasn't necessarily good enough to be at that high level game in, game out. We saw what they did in non-conference play, which was basically a goose egg. And then you get to league play, and they were able to navigate it just enough to find their way into the ACC championship game. So then you go down and you see, okay, Georgia Tech loses their quarterback. Virginia, Duke loses their quarterback. You have Louisville obviously losing their quarterback, but I actually think it could be a net positive. And oh, by the way, they lost 4 conference games too. Wake Forest, change at quarterback. NC State, quarterback back, but is that program good enough? Cal, quarterback back, but is that program good enough? So and you guys who watch this show, All Access AM, we're live 8 to 9 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Central Time. And you guys will generally learn about me that I'm always going to look to the quarterback play, and it's largely going to determine how I, at least if I was going down there and we were all sitting there saying, okay, we're going to rank our ACC teams 1 through, whatever, we're going to go down and we're going to say, okay, for me, I'm going to start my list and I'm going to say, here's where I think the best quarterbacks are. I think Miami, SMU, Pitt, NC State, Cal, like that's kind of that group right there. But then you've got to dive into how good are the programs. And then you have to wrestle with okay, can an Alberto Mendoza be good for Georgia Tech? Will Lincoln Kienholz be good for Louisville? Will the changing of the guard at Wake Forest be good for the Demon Deacons? Those are all things that you then have to wrestle with and bounce that off of how good the rest of the roster is, how good the rest of the program is. Like for me, Florida State, they went 5-7 last year, 2-6 in conference play. I think Ashton Daniel, and we'll talk about them in just a second, but I think their quarterback situation is just a touch better than it was last year. And I do feel like it's going to be a kind of upgrade moving to Mike Norvell as the play caller. I mean, that's just me. I know Gus Malzahn had success, but I'm just not a huge fan of maybe where FSU was at as a whole because of that offensive just direction that they had with Tommy Castellanos, very up and down, very, very all over the place. They don't have a lot of proven, reliable skill players. So I feel like that's something that that offense just didn't necessarily deliver when it needed to at times. And then on the flip side, the defense had to get right. So, but I think their quarterback play can be improved. So if that's the case, then FSU, can they get back to a bowl, but can they be that surprise team? Can they be that team that goes from not a bowl game to right in the race for the ACC? I don't necessarily think that's the case. which is a part of why I've got kind of this top heavy view of the ACC going into 2026. So let's dive into that from a spring perspective. The quarterback battles that are settled are Miami, SMU. It seems like Georgia Tech with Alberto Mendoza coming in, Louisville with Lincoln Kienholz, NC State, CJ Bailey, Cal with Dron's Kiowa Sagapatelli. Those are some of the ones that stand out as far as them being settled for the most part. And then you get into, well, let's look at FSU right now. And Florida State has Ashton Daniels, who comes in from Stanford. They have Kevin Sperry, who's back, who played admirably against Stanford. Went 4 of 7, 69 yards, ran a little bit. Here's the thing, though. And our guy, Pete Nakos of On3, shared some spring practice intel from FSU. And I've kept a close eye on what's going down in Tallahassee, of course, because SMU opens there. And they have the belief, at least from what they're telling Pete, that we have 2 quarterbacks that can go in and win games. I don't think they have 2 quarterbacks that can go and win games. And what I mean by that is I think Ashton Daniels is the one that can go in and win them games. I think Kevin Sperry is going to severely limit their offense as a whole. And when you see what I'm talking about with Ashton Daniels, and if they put him in the right situations that I think they can with Mike Norvell, I think you'll see him turn it on and it finally kind of come together for him like he's been looking for throughout this transfer run that he's been on, going from Stanford to Auburn and now to FSU. With Kevin Sperry, he's a homegrown talent, brought in there, signed, had a little bit of an interesting recruitment, but can come in and make a little bit of a dent. But I don't think he's somebody that game in, game out is going to absolutely wow you. Now, he may make me look silly. I don't know. That's the fun thing about college football. That's why I don't get bent out of shape sharing how I feel. That's why I don't necessarily tiptoe around things for the most part. When if you're going to ask me, hey, how do you feel about the quarterback situation at FSU? Here's how I feel. But also there's this wild thing called the future. We'll learn about the future and then we'll see where I was right, where I was wrong. And hopefully you guys in the chat will also be able to share the same. And we could say, hey, I remember when so-and-so in the chat said this, it didn't happen. And then, one day you guys are arguing about it with me and it's fun. That's what I want the show to be, is kind of that style, a little back and forth with the chat and a little bit of us sharing our opinions. But beyond that, FSU just has a problem with playmakers. Deuce Robinson is really, really talented. They are missing some other playmakers like DeCerio Riles, who came over from East Carolina. They're looking for people to step up, and their run game is an area that can really, really change. I think the backs that they brought in with Samuel Singleton Jr., Trey Wisner, you've got Osumane Chroma, who's in the mix there. I think that running game has a chance to be really good. I just don't necessarily have that much faith going into the season around the FSU offensive line. What I want to see is a change in how they do their jobs, how they play down in, down out consistently. And I put a lot of this on the offense for FSU because I think there's so much left to be desired with where they actually accomplish their goals and not. And I think that's a big change for, how you necessarily view, offensive performance. Like 29 points per game is just fine. It's not bad. It's good. It's not great. But when you are just on the cusp of being a top 10 offense in yards per game, you're not getting it done in certain situations. And that all has to change. They're one of the worst teams in the country at red zone scoring. And at the same time, they can convert third downs. So which is it with FSU? And defensively, I thought they took really nice strides. They had a top 50 defense in terms of points per game. They had a top 40 defense in terms of yards per game. They were just okay in all sorts of situations. And in particular, in red zone scoring, they were poor. So FSU, 5-7, you look at it on paper, they've got to win over Alabama. of course, kick off the season, and then the wheels kind of fell off the wagon. But this is a team that wasn't too far off. And, they played Miami really, really hard. That was something that, was really disappointing. I think the Clemson game was the most disappointing thing out of everything. You can obviously go back to the Florida game and losing to that type of a Florida team. But I look at that Clemson game as one where, man, you really want that one back because you just didn't get off the bus against a bad Clemson team as a whole, in my opinion. And, that a team that defensively was kind of all over the place, you score 10 points. So I think some of the spring intel around FSU, I have no doubt that people are telling Pete Nakos this. I'm always going to give my opinion and say, look, if they're going to even say that Kevin Sperry is ready for this moment, type of deal, I just don't see it. And quarterbacks can develop, but with the situation that FSU was in last year with losing the way they did, for him to have such a limited opportunity, I mean, I wonder when we're going to start seeing when. Not that FSU was out of the race for a bowl game. They were right there at the end. If they would have beaten a Florida or an NC State or something like that. But when you very, very clearly are out of an ACC championship race or a college football playoff race, how do you then go about making that move to the future? And I wonder when we see that happen. Like, how do you say, hey, we're going to get so-and-so ready to play. He's going to be ready in a week, and we're going to give him a start at home. It's going to be a good opportunity for him. We're going to game plan around him. He knows that's coming, and then we'll see how it goes. And if we put so-and-so back in, great. But kind of that, it's not tanking. It's you need to evaluate your roster. You need to put them in adverse situations and see how they perform. So I'm interested to see how teams, or if teams, start to do that. And that'll be something that if I was running a program, I would take a look at doing. Speaking of take a look at doing, hope you guys will take a look at working with our friends at the La La Land Foundation. The La La Land Foundation is an incredible organization that helps youth transition into adulthood out of the foster care system. They do an incredible job of just finding all sorts of different ways to work with people to help them achieve their dreams, help them achieve their goals in a world that isn't necessarily going to give them any sort of helping hand up. And when you see some of the stories that the La La Land Foundation helps accomplish, it just really warms your heart. It makes you feel better about the direction that the world is having or is doing and going in. As I think as a world, we're looking for ways to better serve other human beings. And if that's the type of organization we can be a part of, that's what we're always going to try to do. And so our friends at the La La Land Foundation are just incredible partners with us. And we're so appreciative of all the things that they do to help us as far as, working with us in our all access AM side of things. And all right, we continue on here with some ACC spring football notes. Here's where I want to go to. And I mentioned Florida State in a quarterback competition, but one team that isn't going to have a quarterback competition is Pitt. Mason Heinschel is back. Year 2 as a starter. He took over and made really just all the plays necessary to put Pitt in position down the stretch to be a team that had a fighting shot to go to the college football playoff and to be a team that could make that type of an appearance. But instead, they went to Georgia Tech. They got a huge win, but they also had fumbled it down the stretch with losses to Miami and losses to Notre Dame. And so, how do you take that next step? And Pitt is a program under Pat Narduzzi has been one that, hasn't taken the next step to greatness. And the interesting thing here is here's their last, we can go back really as long as we want, but 8-5, 7-6, 3-9, 9-4, 11-3, lost in the Peach Bowl back in 2021. Or excuse me, yeah, 11-3. And then 6-5, 8-5, 7-7, 5-7, 8-5, 8-5. So Pitt is what amounts to before last season. Okay. This is where it's fun with this new era of college football we're in, where we start to see some of these past storylines leave us. I mean, Pitt was essentially the Texas A&M of the ACC. A flash in the pan here, an opportunity to make a big name for itself there, but it is a program that doesn't necessarily do well in basketball at all. So where's your money going? How do you raise that level of investment? Well, what they did was they were able to keep Mason Heinschel, which is very, very important, obviously. And Pat Narduzzi was sharing some of the things that he liked about his scrimmage over the weekend, and Mason Heinschel was one of the winners of the grades that were handed out. And the defense at the same time had a really strong day. And that is, I think, if you're taking it, if you're trusting what Pat Narduzzi is saying, that's a good thing, because Pitt has lost so much off that defense. And Nathan Breisinger has been on the show, talked about that, talked about some of the talent that, like Rasheem Biles, who's headed out the door, who's gone, went to Texas. Those are big names that left. And when you're able to build up your defense and maybe they jump up to that next level, maybe this is the year that they can turn the corner. But Pitt is one of those programs that when I'm ranking, like we talked about earlier, the ACC, and I'm not able to sit there and say, okay, love Miami's quarterback situation, love SMU's, love NC State's, love Cal, love Pitt. But why would I, preseason wise, for a team that didn't necessarily go out and wow the transfer portal world, why would I say this is Pitt's year? It's Pitt's time. They're going to be one of those teams in Charlotte. They're going to be right in the mix of the race. And they weren't far off with how crazy and wild the ACC race was, in a sense. But I mean, 8-5 is 8-5. And I say all that to say, I think the ACC is going to find a way to fix the tiebreaker situation where an 8-5 type of team, sure, they could lose all three or four, depending on which team they are, of their non-conference games, but they're probably not going to make it into the ACC championship just as a whole this time. And so I think that's important to keep in the back of your mind, right? And so that's what I'm going to always battle with Pitt until they prove me wrong. So when you have Mason Heinschel, the floor should be really high, and they shouldn't necessarily have to go through what they went through last year of, wow, the quarterback situation is in bad shape. We've got to make a change. We've already lost 2 games. This year they open with Miami of Ohio. They face off against UCF. You got Syracuse, Bucknell, which honestly, I didn't even remember or know that Bucknell played football. Then you should be rolling into Virginia Tech with an undefeated record. Big game in Blacksburg to kick off October. You won't play another team that really had a pulse in 2025 until Miami, but you got to go down there and play them. Then you face Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, Cal. It's all gettable. It's really gettable. But are you going to actually change your stripes this year? And I just don't know if I'm there yet. I want to find out more about Pitt. If there's a program in the ACC I want to find out more about, it's Pitt, because I know about Mason Heinschel. I know what he can deliver. He went through it at times, the growing pains, but for the large part, he was very, very good. How does he take the lessons that he learned in 2025 and turn them into key pieces of his growth and turn them into major development for him in 2026. Jerry Morphew said North Carolina State was able to keep CJ Bailey, but they lost all their tools. Did they bring in any talent? Yeah, that is my big question with NC State. Is how do they surround CJ Bailey with talent? With Hollywood Smothers out the door and a couple of other major pieces gone, that's important to realize when we look at NC State. NC State is kind of that program too, like Pitt, where they haven't ever taken the next step. And I'm saying that is a program that is so ready to make a move. They just got to find a way to do it. Kurt Roper's back as in his second season as the play caller for NC State under Dave Dorian. The transfers are getting in the mix. Transfers are kind of ready to go. They did go kind of offensive heavy because they also got rated a little bit. But when you see how CJ Bailey has command of that offense, it's really important to keep that in mind. And they added, Jamarian McFarland or Jamarian McCrimmon and Daniel Cruz up front to help him. They're hoping that they can work into that front five and give them a really good shot to protect CJ Bailey. He had to do so much on his own. And even though Hollywood Smothers was elite, it really took like CJ Bailey legacy type games for them to win some of those critical ones that they had. So it doesn't make me feel good about where they are. It doesn't make me feel good about their potential to take the next step. And that's probably how it's going to be over there in Raleigh until they decide, hey, we are fed up with being average. And we've talked about that in the ACC, where you need some of these programs to really step up to the plate and change the way they do things and change the level of commitment that they have to then elevate the rest of the conference. And check Virginia Tech, check Virginia. SMU's coming in and done that. Cal made a new coaching hire. Stanford, can those work out? Some of these programs that have these coaches that have been there for a while, they've got to take that next step and it starts in spring with them. Otherwise, they're going to get lapped. The Virginia of the world, the SMU, some of those programs are going to keep some of the Clemsons, the FSUs, some of the bigger names down because they're not pressing the right buttons behind the scenes as far as roster construction, as far as NIL, all of those things. So NC State is one of those sleeping giants that can be awoken with some of the right money behind it and some of the right commitment to being good at football. It's not all about basketball these days. So that said, a team that is certainly getting it done in football and basketball is Miami, and EJ Holland of Kane Sport does join us now. EJ, good morning. How are things in Coral Gables? I see you're set up with the whiteboard. It must be springtime.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been busy, man. I was just in Coral Gables. Miami had a big recruiting weekend. They have one of the biggest recruiting weekends in the Mario Cristobal era coming up this weekend. A ton of 5 stars, flip targets, top 100 recruits. It's been really, really exciting at Miami. They're building for sustained success in the future. So yeah, exciting times here this spring.
When you look at this weekend for Mario Cristobal and his staff, who are one on the offense, one on the defensive side of the ball that you need to find out the most about with this coaching staff and with these recruits that they need to make the move for, or else maybe they're going to not necessarily get left behind, because Miami doesn't seem like they're out of any recruitment these days, but these are the guys that you're wondering, hey, what's really going on there?
I think, on the offensive side of the ball, it starts with 5-star offensive tackle Mark Matthews. He's at St. Thomas Aquinas, which is one of the premier programs in the country, obviously in the state of Florida, down in South Florida. Mark Matthews is a local kid. They're doing everything they can to keep him home. Texas A&M is making a big push on the recruiting front. And I think that, the Aggies have done a decent job there, but Miami is still the front runner. He's set to be back on campus this weekend. And look, Miami offers a lot when it comes to offensive linemen. They have elite development, one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Alex Mirabal. So it's really appealing for Mark Matthews to stay home. He was also on campus earlier this month for 305 Day. Spent some time at Mario Cristobal's house where they had the event, and saw Nick Lanier, a fellow South Florida five-star level talent, commit to the Hurricanes on the spot. So Miami would love to wrap this one up, get him in the class earlier, not let Texas A&M and others continue to make runs. So it'll be interesting to see what comes from Matthews this weekend. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm really interested to see if Miami can flip five-star edge DJ Jacobs away from Ohio State. That was one of the more interesting recruitments this winter. He was considered a Miami lean. Multiple predictions were in for the Hurricanes. He ended up committing to Ohio State last second when he made his announcement live. So I think that Miami obviously still has a shot here. He's set to be back on campus this weekend for the Spring Ball Splash, which is the huge recruiting event going on. Miami, like with the offensive line, has a lot to offer to pass rushers. You have defensive line coach Jason Taylor, who's a Hall of Famer, one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. He's done it as a player. You have Mario Cristobal, who obviously invests in the trenches on both sides. He has the offensive line background, but he also obviously cares a lot about winning up front on the defensive line. And he's been personally involved in this recruitment as well. So I think if any team can flip DJ Jacobs away from Ohio State, it's definitely Miami. So those are, two big time five stars in the trenches where Miami wins. Miami kind of has that label as a flashy program, but what really sets Miami apart is their ability to win in the trenches. So locking down Matthews, potentially flipping Jacobs, those are the big recruitments that I'm watching this weekend.
And what is a big recruiting weekend without Flip Watch? Miami is always on the prowl in that regard too. And one player that really stands out to me, looking up your list over there at canesport.com, is five-star edge prospect DJ Jacobs. And this is a prospect that right out of that Roswell, Georgia area, which is just so talent rich. Miami's been involved with him for a while now, but he's committed to the Buckeyes. Where does Miami go in trying to press the buttons for this one to go their way?
Obviously in any five-star recruitment, you're going to have to win the NIL battle, and I think that's the long play. But I think with DJ Jacobs, he's a really impressive kid. When you talk to him, he's not maybe your usual recruit in the sense that he's extremely mature for a 17-year-old. He's very, very well-spoken. Education actually matters to him some. And I think when you look at Miami's private school education and what they can offer academic-wise, that has to be appealing, but also just development. And I know Ohio State develops guys as well. But again, Miami having Jason Taylor, who's been in the NFL, who was a star in the NFL, who's a Hall of Famer, that has to mean something. And then having two, potential first-round draft picks here. You saw what Miami did with Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor. Like, that has to be really, really appealing. And Miami just did that. They're coming off the national title appearance. They beat Ohio State on the field in the college football playoff. I think all of those are big selling points for DJ, just making him feel at home as well, getting him around some of the commits and the other targets in kind of a more relaxed setting at this pool party event. I think all of that will help with him.
And when you see Miami, looking at the defensive line, I think that's a spot where they can also make some moves with another flip target, Jaden Bryant, the LSU commitment. What's your sense there as they battle him for the Tigers? Of course, another school that is investing a lot in NIL.
Yeah, kind of similar to DJ Jacobs. I mean, you have to win the NIL battle for those types of recruits. I know Jaden Bryant isn't listed as a five-star, but he's in that range there. I mean, he's a top 32 player. So if the cycle finished right now, he would be a five-star. So again, I think winning the NIL battle, obviously, but also just selling that development. I think that's the biggest thing Miami can do. You know, if the NIL is right for a lot of these guys, right? If the NIL is similar for a lot of these guys, what's going to make the difference for Miami? And to me, it's the development. It's the proof in the pudding with Messidor and Bain. It's Jason Taylor's resume. And so I think that Jaden Bryant, DJ Jacobs, they're coming to this event for a reason, because they have high interest in Miami, because they believe in the development. And that's something that can help the Hurricanes win these major flips at the edge position.
And Miami, I think, was able to be so good up front and obviously dominate the line of scrimmage and do that. And at the same time, they're trying to elevate their secondary recruiting, I think, just a little bit. You know, Jabari Antoine is somebody who got in there late. You know, I remember the ejection from the semifinal game and played a lot. Where's Miami at as far as improving their high school recruiting? Because so much of it on the back end last year was key transfers, and they were awesome. But you bring in somebody like a Joshua Dobson, another 5-star, top 10 overall prospect, and you know they're trying to make a move in that recruitment because it's his first visit. So can Miami go from a team that is getting his first visit here as the month flips to April to getting that recruitment, you know, in their favor and making that big move this weekend?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Miami this cycle is definitely willing to invest in the secondary, specifically, you know, at corner where Joshua Dobson obviously is. He's a 5-star guy. And you saw Miami, like you mentioned, Billy, have success in the portal. They did it again this cycle, this portal cycle, adding a couple of prospects in the secondary. But yeah, they definitely want to invest at corner on the high school scene. And Joshua Dobson is right up there. I mean, he's the number 2 corner in the country. He's a kid who I had a chance to meet with in North Carolina last month, and he is considered an LSU lean early on. So another Miami LSU battle here. Texas A&M also involved. So, you know, the usual suspects that can get really aggressive on the NIL front. But again, I think with Miami here, maybe a little bit of a different sell than the edge position. I think you can offer more opportunity and say, hey, you know, we have a need at corner. You can come in and potentially play early. We have one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, Corey Heatherman. He's going to allow you to man up, press up. He's a guy who likes to attack. He was a Broyles Award finalist. Honestly, should have won it, to be, you know, frank. I think that all of that is appealing to a guy like Josh Dobson, to a guy like John Meredith, the number 1 cornerback in the country. He's looking to visit here in a couple of weeks, just named Miami in his top group. So I think that cornerbacks see an opportunity to come in and play. And even at the safety position, I think Miami is looking to invest there as well. They just had top 100 Texas A&M safety commit Jaquan Snell on campus as well. So yeah, Miami's looking to invest back there. Joshua Dobson is definitely one of the more important visitors coming in for the Spring Ball Splash event.
When you flip over to the offensive side of the ball, you know, we saw what Miami's done at the quarterback position with transfers like Cam Ward, Carson Beck. Now they bring in Darian Mensah, an incredible talent who's going to have Miami right back in the mix for the college football playoff. I have no doubt about that. That said, they are still going down the path of high school recruiting. And in that sense, they're having 2 top prospects come in this weekend as they're looking to make a move at the quarterback position as well.
Yeah, not just 2 top prospects, Billy. This whole week, they have their top 4 quarterback targets coming in. So Israel Abrams, top 100 quarterback out of Chicagoland. He's on campus right now. Peter Bork, a former Michigan commit, is set to be on campus tomorrow. And then you have 2 other big ones coming in. Rivals 300 quarterback Davin Davidson, who's an in-stater, has really seen his recruitment blow up over the last couple of months, as well as newly minted 5-star Will Menzel out of Arizona. He'll be at the Spring Ball Splash event too. So I think Miami, like you said, they've had a lot of success in the transfer portal, back to back years of landing big time guys out of the portal, but they really want to get a high school quarterback that they can develop as well, that can be there. And I think all four of those guys are really good options. I mean, three of them are top 100 guys. Davin Davidson wouldn't be surprising if he finished there as well. I asked some of these guys, hey, does Miami's transfer portal approach affect you? Because I think that's kind of maybe a big negative selling point for other teams, is like, hey, Miami's just going to over recruit you. They're getting these 1-year rentals out of the portal, so you won't play. And I think that these recruits aren't really listening to that. I talked to Israel Abrams, and he told me, hey, I'm going to have to compete at any other school. Just like, it doesn't matter if they're bringing in transfer guys. They could bring in another high school guy. I'm going to have to compete and win the job. And I think a lot of these guys, especially at the quarterback position, where you just have to have kind of a different mentality and mindset and confidence and different aura about you. I think those guys want to compete, and they don't really mind that Miami's getting these transfer portal guys. They want to go in and compete. They see what Miami is building. I think a lot of guys like what Miami obviously did on the field this year. Miami recruits weapons. They've shown that. They have one of the most explosive playmakers in the country in Malachi Toney. And so I think the offense can be even more exciting than it was last year with a guy like Darian Mensah, who offers a little bit more mobility or more just a little bit more juice there. I think that quarterbacks are going to be really impressed with Miami for years to come, and it's going to be an appealing stop, and it already is for a lot of these guys, which is why you see so many highly touted recruits coming in despite the transfer portal recruiting. So big week for Miami quarterback recruiting. It'll be interesting to see which one of those guys actually ends up in the class. All of them would be, really, really good ads.
And look, it can't all be about the quarterback. I mean, look at the skill talent that Miami has had around their last couple quarterbacks in particular. And, they have on campus right now for this upcoming season, but they're still working to add to that, right? And Miami is looking to make a move with the nation's number 3 running back, Myson Johnson-Cook, a guy we're both really familiar with. He's been on the recruiting scene a long, long time now. He's coming in this weekend. He's up at East St. Louis now. Where do you see Miami fitting into this recruitment as they look to overtake the Missouri Tigers?
Yeah, you mentioned it. I think a lot of people this offseason, they're talking about Miami's offense and how explosive it can be with Mensah and Cooper Barcade and Malachi Toney and Cam Bond coming in. But, Mark Fletcher's back. Miami's committed to running the football. They obviously showed that last year, and I talked about it. Miami wins in the trenches. And so if you're a running back, Miami is very appealing to you right now. You saw what Fletcher did last year. You saw the guys that they have up front. You saw the guys they have bringing in up front, landing the nation's number 1 offensive tackle in Jackson Cantwell, potentially, being able to close with Mark Matthews, the 5-star offensive tackle we talked about earlier in the show. All of that is very appealing to running back recruits. They have a new position coach in Fabian Upshaw, who's a young up-and-comer, but he has NFL experience. He has something to sell as well. I think that Miami is surging in the race for Myson Johnson-Cook. Missouri has been labeled as the early leader. He's an East St. Louis kid. Mizzou does a decent job of keeping guys close to home, at home. But I think Miami has really, really moved the needle. He was just at that 305-day event I talked about earlier last month, now set to be back this weekend for the Spring Ball Splash event. So I think it wouldn't be surprising if I come in with a prediction for Miami to land Myson Johnson-Cook, who's an absolute freak. I mean, 6'1", 6'2", 200-pounder who runs in the 10.5s in the 100-meter, might be even faster than that. I think his PR was like a 10.39 or something insane at that size. Just in general, 10.39 is blazing, but at that size, I mean, you're an absolute freak. So I think that Myson Johnson-Cook, another one of the more important visitors coming in this weekend.
Yeah, I feel like we get some of those freak shows that go viral for running, at that type of a size every year, and they become the darlings of it. But one of the darlings for this Miami staff that they're also recruiting is more of that Malachi Toney type of a player, and Eric McFarland, another top 25, would be a 5-star if the rankings ended today for the Rivals Industry ranking. Comes over from IMG's all the way out in Las Vegas from where he's from. but he's in the state of Florida now, a huge target for the Canes. He'll be back in town this weekend.
Yeah, Eric McFarland's recruitment was a little interesting. Miami was thought to be that major player early on, and then things kind of faded a little bit, and schools like Texas A&M and Ohio State gained a lot of buzz. But Miami's back in the picture here. I had a chance to spend some time with McFarland at the OT7 event last weekend, and he told me, hey, I've been building a better and better relationship with them. I really loved what Miami did with Malachi Toney, and like you said, Billy, kind of a similar player, not the biggest wide receiver, more of a true slot guy, but man, he's explosive, he's quick, he's fast in a straight line. He's a guy who can do a lot of different things. You can put him in the backfield, you can move him around, you can have him return kicks and punts. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities there with Toney, and I think that's your selling point with Eric McFarland, right? Is like, hey, look at Malachi Toney, that can be you. That's an easy sell, right? So I'm interested to see, how much this visit moves the needle. And if Miami, ends up taking one of those official visit spots. Right now, he has all 4 of his summer official visits already scheduled. So, if this visit goes well, he could shift things around, put Miami in there, and then, the Hurricanes will really have something cooking with McFarland.
Do you get the sense that we'll see any fireworks this weekend? That's probably what, in our world, when there are big recruiting weekends, what's the most asked question? It's, well, who's going to commit? Don't show me what the labor, show me the baby, or whatever the expression is. Who do you think Miami is, if you had to put a most likely on it, could land a commitment from this weekend?
I mean, from the headliner group, I do think they can, like I said, take that lead and maybe even close with a commitment with Myson Johnson Cook. I think Miami has been trending in the right direction there over the last, maybe month and a half. I think Mark Matthews doesn't have a decision timeline right now. I mean, he's talked about maybe doing it in the summer, but hasn't been, super firm on that. So if Miami can, do everything to check all his boxes this weekend, then maybe they get the big fish on board, and that would be such a massive win. Look, they did it with Nick Lanier at 305 day. They got him to commit in front of all those recruits, and it was huge. It was massive all over social media. I think it moved the needle for a lot of blue chip recruits. I think you can have an even bigger effect with Mark Matthews doing it at the Spring Ball Splash event. So those are 2 of, maybe the bigger guys. There are some, more under, valued guys that are going to be on campus that we're keeping a close eye on. If Miami makes a big push for a guy like 3-star defensive lineman Xavier Perkins, I could see him, shutting it down, or 3-star edge Travaris Finley, who's a local guy out of Miami, Chaminade Madonna. So, some of those guys could certainly jump in. But I mean, if you're talking big fish, I'm definitely keeping an eye on Mark Matthews and Myson Johnson Cook.
With spring ball here, I mean, do you have any takeaways, tidbits that stand out to you as far as, where Miami's at and the adjustment with Darian Mensah in there?
Yeah, I think that, the transfers are really showing out. I think everybody's really excited, like I said, about how explosive the offense can be. Darian Mensah will be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He already has that chemistry with Cooper Barkate, the Duke wide receiver who's joining him. They had that great connection in the ACC last year. Cam Vaughn has made some highlight reel grabs. I don't know if you've seen on Miami Twitter, Billy, but some of those plays that Cam Vaughn's making out there are really, really impressive. In fact, I caught up with one of the top athletes in the country, Amir Sears, who's a Miami kid. He was at practice late last week. I asked him, who was a standout? And he was like, hey, yeah, I got a chance to spend some time around Malachi Toney. Mally did his thing as usual, but Cam Vaughn, he's the guy that's really making some noise out there. So I think a lot of people are excited about what this offense can look like, with the newly added transfers. And the offensive line, they have to replace a couple of key pieces there. But Jackson Cantwell, who I mentioned, the number 1 overall recruit in America, could potentially start as a true freshman. He's been moving the needle out there as well. Another true freshman that's been catching some eyes in the secondary, James Dunnigan, was a late flip from Kansas of all places. He's from out there. But I think Miami got a nice steal there. Gavin Mueller, another freshman that has been making some noise at tight end. He's primed to get some significant time. You talk about freak athletes, he's definitely one to watch there. And, I think guys that got some significant time on defense last year that'll see bigger roles, that have a chance to really establish themselves as those next household names, or guys like Justin Scott, who was a former 5-star defensive lineman, Marquise Lightfoot, who was also, a 5-star level edge prospect with Messidor and Bain leaving. Miami really needs Marquise Lightfoot to step up, and I think he will. So, those are some names that definitely I've heard some buzz about, and especially from recruits that are there watching and paying attention. Those are some guys they've mentioned as well.
All right, EJ Holland, man, we appreciate all the scoop on Miami on this edition of All Access AM, man. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, appreciate it, Billy.
There he goes. Always have to have EJ Holland on during the recruiting time of year, in particular. One of the most plugged in guys in our space here in On3 and Rivals. So appreciate him for stopping in, and appreciate all of you guys for tuning in to this edition of All Access AM. Kind of went through some stock up, stock down in a sense around the ACC, kind of where I see some of those teams, standing heading into the 2026 season. We'll get into more of that. I'm trying to plan out when I want to, do an updated spring look around the ACC power rankings, if you can call them that, when we might do that here on the show and share where my head is at as spring practices around the ACC continue to roll on for the next few weeks. So we've got plenty of football to talk about in that regard, plenty of recruiting as well, as a lot of these teams chase their future players for their rosters. So appreciate all of you guys for watching this edition of All Access AM. Thank you to OPW Solutions and La La Land Foundation for sponsoring the show. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Billy Embody. We'll catch you next time as we have a special guest on our Thursday show. So looking forward to that. We'll catch you then, 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time, right here on All Access AM.